Hello and welcome to A Proud Malcontent. I'm Peter Bell and I am a proud malcontent. It's Wednesday, the 17th of September. Now that means that tomorrow's the 18th. And now, just a minute, there's something happening on the 18th, is there not? Indeed, there is. It's tomorrow, the 18th, that the Salvo Liberation team will be in Geneva to give a presentation to the 60th sitting of the European Human Rights, the UN Human Rights Commission. I always get that one wrong. I always stick that European in there. This is it's a significant day. The date itself has some significance for us here in Scotland, September the 18th being the date of the sham referendum in 2014, the one that could never have led to independence, but which seemed very important at the time. And it probably was. I tend to think of it now as a precursor. It's something that we had to do it. We had to get that out of the way so that we could move on to the more serious business of restoring Scotland's independence. So, given that tomorrow is the date of the presentation, it stands to reason that there would be something about this in the National, and there's two very, very interesting pieces. One from Alf Baird and one from Craig Murray. We'll get to the Craig Murray one later. I'd like to finish it with it, but I just want to run briefly through what Alf Baird has to say. The headline is Liberation Scotland's Alf Baird calls union hoax ahead of UN event. That's referring, of course, to the what is now claimed by Salvo Liberation, that the union simply doesn't exist. It never happened. There was no union. It was simply an annexation of Scotland. Scotland as a nation was just simply absorbed into Greater England. Scotland ceased to be. England continued, and we got a wee bit of representation in their parliament. So not really a union at all. As usual, I've highlighted a few passages that I want to comment on, and I'll read them out as I go. Campaigners, well, this is the National, by the way, and this piece is written by Hamish Morrison, and I need to have a quiet word with young Hamish. You know? What he says is campaigners seeking to have Scotland decolonised by the United Nations hope to expose one of the longest political hoaxes, in quotes, in history. The thing is, Hamish, the UN doesn't do the decolonising. The UN simply says, this is a place, this is a non-self-governing territory which requires to be decolonised. They don't actually do the decolonising. We have to do that ourselves. This point will be getting made over and over again. Moving on, this is from Alf Baird himself. It was clear that not many people knew what independence actually meant, and that included the political classes as well as the media to a large extent. And that is correct. We didn't know what independence actually meant because we didn't know where we were. We didn't know our true situation. And not knowing our true situation, we didn't know what was required to alter that situation, to get out of that situation. So that we didn't have that understanding. And that's one of the things that has changed over the 11 years since the 2014 referendum. The what Alf Baird himself once called the intellectual wing of the independence movement has moved on, but the political parties, the political elite, Scotland's own political elite, they've been left behind. And we see this particularly with the SNP, but it's true of the whole political setup. It's true of them all, that they have been left behind as this part of the independence movement has gone forward from 2014. The politicians are stuck there. In fact, they're stuck in 2012. They're stuck with the thinking of 2012. I once wrote an article which Alf Baird has been kind enough to cite from time to time, called the New Thinking. And what I sought to do in that article was highlight the fact that there was new thinking. We were rethinking the whole independence issue, the whole constitutional issue. And we have come round to this new thinking, which is more to do with liberation. It's not to do with some sort of negotiated settlement with the British state. It's liberation. It's taking our independence. Let's go back to the article. Alf Baird again. Essentially, what Salvo and Liberation Scotland have been able to do over the years is to develop a much more detailed understanding about what independence means, and it really means decolonisation and liberation. And that's, I have to say, lovely picture of my pal Gordon Henderson there, handsome man. There was a learning process involved for me here as well, it must be said, because I belatedly came round to this idea of Scotland having been annexed, having been a colony. In fact, I used to use the term annexed, thinking it was somehow different from colonisation. It isn't, but I just didn't like the term colony, and I had some difficulty applying it to Scotland. And I was like a lot of people in that regard. However, largely thanks to Alf Baird, Sarah Salyers, and others, and also thanks to having an open mind, I was able to educate myself, and came round to this idea that yes, that is our situation. We have been colonised. Our nation has been annexed, and all the features of colonisation are there. Let's go back to the article. And the next quote, there's a colonial mindset here which automatically, in many cases, will refute any idea that Scotland is colonised, will refute any idea that the people are under oppression. Just what I was saying, that is what I used to do. I used to refute these ideas, and I used to simply reject them out of hand. It was only when I came to try and refute them, to try and argue against them, that I discovered that I couldn't. I could not sensibly argue that Scotland is not a colony, that we have not been colonised, that we're not an annexed territory. I could not refute that argument. And it's the colonial mindset is an important term. The colonised mind is another way of putting it. It's the term that I normally use, colonised mind, but it is this colonial mindset. Back to Alf again, but closer analysis shows that oppression is obscured largely by the cultural assimilation process, which is quite extensive in British colonies where the English language is dominant. where English literature is dominant, and also the culture and symbols of the colonial administrative power is dominating as well. A fairly straightforward concept there. It is the dominant culture. Our own culture, our own history. I think people my age will remember this from the school days when we were taught no Scottish history at all, really, and what we were taught was from an English perspective. It was from the perspective of England, the victor. The victors write the history. For example, there's one that I remember well, taking exception to when I was at school, was the portrayal of William Wallace as a traitor. Even as a school kid of 11, 12 years old, I could not see how he could possibly be called a traitor when he had no allegiance to the English king. But that's just an example of the way our own history was taken from us and fed back in an Anglified manner, in a Britified manner, so as to suit the dominant culture. Now, this wasn't necessarily malicious. It may be just one of these things that happens if you don't fight against it, if you don't take safeguards against it. But a lot of it was malicious. A lot of it was disinformation rather than misinformation. We were being made to believe that we were subordinate and inferior. So back to the article, and we're skipping over Professor Robert Black here, and probably shouldn't, because his contribution has been invaluable. But we've spoken about that before. So moving on. Liberation Scotland and Salvo hope to have Scotland added to a list of non-self-governing territories, which they say would remove Westminster's veto over a second independence referendum and also bypass the need for Holyrood to arrange one. Well, I wouldn't totally agree with that. It wouldn't remove Westminster's veto over our second independent, the exercise of our proper exercise of our right of self-determination. It would not remove that veto if our government continued to acknowledge the British state's right to that veto. If John Swinney or whoever is the First Minister, if they persist in asking Westminster's permission, if they persist in asking for a Section 30 order, then they are granting that veto to Westminster, a veto to which they're not entitled. So what the UN would be saying was that Westminster shouldn't have that veto, but they would still have it so long as our government was giving it to them. And it says it would also bypass the need for Holyrood to arrange one. I'm very much of the opinion that we should take back our parliament. It has been hijacked by the British state. It has been usurped. But I am of the opinion that we should take it back. We should take back control of the parliament rather than setting up some whole new structure so that we can have a proper independence referendum. I would prefer to use the structures that are already there. I regard the Scottish Parliament as the legitimate Parliament of Scotland. It's the continuation of our old Parliament. As Winnie Ewing said in 1999, that's it being reconvened. It was the reconvening of our Parliament. It was taken from us in 1707. It was returned to us in 1999, but it was returned in chains, the chains of devolution. We strike off those chains and our Parliament is ours again, and that Parliament has all the powers of a national parliament as soon as we strike off the chains of devolution. And we do that quite simply by asserting, I say simply, but by asserting the Scottish Parliament's legislative competence in matters relating to the Constitution. Because when you have control over the Constitution, you have control over everything. Asserting legislative competence in the area of the Constitution, over constitutional affairs, is tantamount to a unilateral declaration of independence, which, remember, is not the scary thing they want you to think it is. There's nothing scary about it at all. So let's go back to the article and this business of Scotland being a colony. The interesting thing, what is a colony? And that is, or rather, what is a nation? When the UN is looking to see if this is really a nation that is being talked about, and therefore the right of self-determination applies, a nation or a people. But what we have are these 3 points. To be a nation must be geographically separate from the administering power. That's the colonizer. Administering power is the UN's euphemism for the colonizer. That's simply to say we have a border, and there is a border. I've been back and forwards across it a few times. There's definitely a border between Scotland and England. Scotland is a different has a different legislation. The law is different in Scotland, so there has to be an area defined where Scottish law applies, and a different area where English law applies, and the line between those two areas is the border. So there is a border. To be a nation, we must be in possession of a distinct ethnic, cultural, or linguistic characteristics. I think also that applies to Scotland, surely. Our culture may have been suppressed for many years, but that culture is still there. We still have a Scottish culture. The ethnic part of it, perhaps less so. It's less important, at least as far as I'm concerned. It's less important. I can't see how it can be important because we're a mongrel breed, like most nations. We don't, but there is the Scottishness in the sense of being part of a nation. So the ethnic doesn't necessarily mean a relation by blood. It can be something considerably looser. And also the linguistic characteristics. You're hearing my Fife accent. There you go. There's a linguistic characteristic for you. And we must be denied a full measure of self-government, a full measure. We do not have a full measure of self-government. We have a devolved government, and there can never be a full measure of self-government when you're talking about a devolved government, because that government is always answerable to the administering power. And certain matters are reserved. Certain matters are taken out of the hands of our government, our own government, altogether. So, such as defence and foreign affairs. These are taken from us altogether. We have absolutely no say in them. We get to have our politicians, like our First Minister, gets to have contact with other countries, but they have to be chaperoned by someone from the British civil service, someone representing the British government. They're chaperoned just to make sure that they don't speak out of turn. They can't speak for themselves. When they're there, they're speaking only as a devolved administration. And if nothing else, the British chaperone is there to make it clear that the First Minister is speaking as part of the British state. Essentially, the initial point, this is back to Alf again, sorry. Essentially, the initial point is to put together the case to show that this is a valid case. It is an ongoing injustice. It is a very long-standing injustice, one of the longest injustices going, and it's one of the longest political hoaxes. Again, the political hoax part of that refers to the fact that the union was never really existed. It wasn't a union at all. There was the documents there, but they didn't mean anything. We were simply assimilated, subsumed into the English state. It used to be called, the term for it was Greater England. It was a Greater England project. And we became just part of Greater England. So this idea that, sorry, I've forgotten. Oh yes, the injustice. That's an important point. That we have to think of the union. We can talk about the union because people are accustomed to that term. And even if there isn't a real union, even if it never happened, there is kind of like a de facto union. And this de facto union, the whole way that it was done, is an injustice, and it is an ongoing injustice. It's a continuing injustice. It's an injustice that is happening every day, all the time, every minute of every day, to every single one of us who lives in Scotland, every one of us. And incidentally, that applies to everyone who lives in Scotland, everyone who has a sufficiently open mind, that's sufficiently political aware to notice. And this is why a lot of the people who move here from England, they see this injustice better than people who've a lot of people who've lived here all their lives, because they are able to see a contrast. They see a contrast between their lived experience in England and their lived experience in Scotland. And they also see this contrast between the way Scotland is portrayed in England through the media, etc., and the reality of what they find when they come here. So it's an injustice, and independence, restoring Scotland's independence, is rectifying that injustice. It's putting it right. And therefore, what that means is that despite any protestations from the political left, independence is an end in itself, an end, not the end, but an end. It is an end in itself. It has to be an end in itself because it's a restoration of justice. It is restoring justice. It is putting this injustice right. It's ending injustice. And if that is not an end in itself, well, I don't know what is. Right, and let's go over now. The second article that I was going to talk about was one by, actually written by Craig Murray, and he was not interviewed. It was an interview with Alf Baird, but this is an article actually written by Craig Murray. I already said that. I had great difficulty highlighting pieces of this because the whole thing is important. It's a very short piece, and all of it is important. So I'm just going to run through it quickly and comment as I go along. with each paragraph. It starts. If you believe that London will respect the will of the Scottish people and concede an agreed path to independence, no, he does not say a Section 30 referendum, an agreed path to independence, then I can understand why you would portray as cranks or daft those of us who are taking Scotland's case to the United Nations. This has happened, of course, just recently. Tommy Shepherd, rather ignorantly, it must be said, referred to the Salvo Liberation Team as daft, or to the initiative as daft. And we get quite a lot of that. And again, this is the colonized mind at work. It's that colonial mindset. You know, it's uppity jocks. We're Scotland. We've no right to be doing things like that. You know, we haven't got permission or nathing. So it's that's the kind of colonial mindset, colonized mind that we see in action there. Think about that, Tommy Shepherd, as if he'd be listening. Back to Craig Murray. However, if you understand that London will never willingly relinquish Scotland's vast resources and great assets, which are ruthlessly exploited to further the interests of a right-wing British establishment, then your view will be entirely different. And that is like people making the journey, as we called it, from no to yes, the opening of eyes. And I maintain that everyone who embarked on that journey, they started by questioning the union. They started by looking at the union, what effect it has on Scotland and on our lives and on our culture. And they came to the conclusion that the union is an injustice. It is bad for Scotland. It harms us. It actually does harm to every single one of us all the time. So that's basically the two views there. One, the wee uppity jokes that are getting above their station by going to the UN, and the other one, which sees that there is an injustice here which has to be rectified. Back to Craig again. On this view, this is the second view, the view that London will never willingly relinquish Scotland. Not just because of the vast resources, but I have to point out, it's not just because of the resources. It's not all about money. It's also about status, because Scotland is geopolitically extremely important. And its territory, it's a huge bit of territory. And when you include our maritime waters, it's a massive piece of territory that England, that Britain, the British state would lose when Scotland restores independence. On this view, eventually Scotland will need to seize its own independence at home. I want you to remember that sentence. Remember that sentence. Eventually, Scotland will need to seize its own independence at home. Keep that in mind as we go on. Being an independent state exists purely in relation to other independent states, and the only test that counts is recognition by the United Nations. This may need to happen in the teeth of London hostility. You would expect that there would be hostility. It would surprise me greatly if there wasn't. The wedge for this is to lobby for Scotland to be recognised as a non-self-governing territory requiring decolonisation. It meets all the criteria. Scotland has a clear geographical border, a distinct culture and heritage, and has no say in defence, foreign affairs, or macroeconomic decision-making. That sums it up nicely. That is why we should, by rights, be defined as a non-self-governing territory. And the lobbying part of that is important as well, because the lobbying, regardless of where that lobbying might take us, the lobbying itself is important. The act of lobbying. Sovereign isn't just what you are, it's what you do. So these people, Salvo Liberation, are in Geneva. They're in Geneva now, and they are acting as if Scotland is a sovereign nation. And you have to act as if Scotland is a sovereign nation for Scotland to be a sovereign nation and to be seen as a sovereign nation. So the lobbying itself is important, regardless of where it goes, regardless of whether there is any success or not. And that is very much what tomorrow's presentation is about, because it's not the actual hearing, it's a presentation. And that presentation is part of this lobbying process, which is very valid and very important in its own right. Every one of the territories on the UN's decolonisation list has its own assembly and parliament, just like Scotland, where their own colonial client politicians pocket their salaries and do a little administration for the colonial masters, exactly like Holyrood. Craig is perhaps exercising a bit of hyperbole there. He's perhaps slightly overstating the case. But at root, that is what our politicians are doing at the moment, largely because that's what they choose to be doing. They don't kick against this status. I think Craig might be a little less scathing of them if he could see some signs of our politicians, our government in particular, kicking against this classification as client politicians, pocketing their salaries and doing a wee bit of administration for the colonizer. They don't kick against it. That is what is wrong. I can understand that is the situation. That is what is the situation that has been imposed on us. Our parliament was returned to us in 1999 in chains. What our politicians are doing, what the Scottish government is doing, is they're acting as if they're quite comfortable in those chains. They're acting as if those chains are somehow correct. That they should be chained. They should be doing a little bit of an administration for their colonial masters. They behave as if it's right. They don't behave as if there's an injustice being done here. They don't rail against it. They to the extent that they're seeking independence at all, they're seeking it within the confines of the British state. They're trying to work through the British state, through their structure of, through their constitutional and legal framework in order to restore independence, which is simply moving around a wee bit in the change to make them more comfortable. I mean, that's what John Swinney says. He talks about making Holyrood work better. It's simply making the change more comfortable. And they're already quite comfortable for our politicians, as Craig points out. It's absolutely standard for the client official, in quotes, national party in a colony to lose interest in pursuing independence. Once the leadership get their expensively shod feet under the colonial table, sorry, I read that sentence wrongly. I will read it again. It is absolutely standard for the client official national party in a colony to lose interest in pursuing independence once the leadership get their expensively shod feet under the colonial table. These dynamics are extremely well understood by the UN bodies that deal with decolonization. These are the things that might be denied here. That there's a well-recognised process going on here, and we all owe a debt of thanks to largely to Alf Baird for making us aware of the dynamic that's going on here. I believe we can break that dynamic. We can alter it. Others believe that it'll have to be abandoned. The Parliament will have to be abandoned altogether. Frankly, I don't see why we should forfeit it. But that's a wider discussion. The UN knows what colonisation looks like. That is basically what Craig Murray is saying here. The UN knows what colonisation looks like, even if people in Scotland don't. Even if people in Scotland can't recognise it, the UN can. And obviously it would make some difference if the UN actually came out and officially said Scotland is a colony. People who deny it would then have some difficulty in denying it. So this is an important exercise. It's far from being daft. It'll be a long time, Tommy Shepherd, before you live that down. We'll know just how daft it is when we see the outcome. And even if it fails, remember, it is still a worthwhile exercise because it is us acting as a sovereign nation. This is why the UN system interacts with liberation movements and not just the official representatives within the colonial system. You would be very wrong if you believe the UN will only listen to the SNP and not to Liberation Scotland. That's another important. This is why I couldn't do just highlighted points in Craig's article. Because so much of it is so important. And this is something else I had to be educated about. The fact that the UN will deal with liberation movements. And I should say, in passing, the bigger that liberation movement is, the better. So if you haven't joined liberation.scot yet, get on with it. It's a very helpful thing. Okay, and the UN does interact with these non-governmental. When Craig says the SNP is, of course, talking about the Scottish government, and the UN does interact with these liberation movements. And what's more, they interact. The UN interacts. This is Scotland interacting with other nations without that British chaperone. As things stand, if there were any Scottish government representatives there, the British state requires that they would have to have a representative there as well. So, in a way, I'm glad the Scottish government's not involved. This part of the job can be done just as well by Liberation. The SNP would, however, be extremely welcome. This is back to Craig again. The SNP would, however, be extremely welcome to join us in the effort. Maybe he is talking about the SNP there. Maybe he isn't talking about the Scottish government. Because there's nothing to stop the SNP being represented along or being part of the liberation delegation. There's nothing wrong, even going along as an observer or whatever. That something could have been done. A couple of SNP members could have gone along, not ministers. But a couple of representatives from the SNP could have been there. Perhaps the president of the SNP. I don't know whether that would be a suitable job for the president. But the SNP could be there. They've chosen not to be there. Tommy Sheppard. Oh, we're back to Tommy Sheppard again. Tommy Sheppard last week rolled out all the tired old unionist arguments against Scotland's colonial status. Of course, some Scots benefited from the slave trade, fought in imperial armies, and administered the empire. Of course, there was an active union. But all of those things are precisely true of Ireland also. And nobody now denies Ireland was a colony. Part of it still is a colony. That's an interesting point again that Craig makes when he talks about Tommy Sheppard. This was an article. I'll have to put up a link to it, in which Tommy Sheppard. It's the article in which Tommy Sheppard said that this whole exercise was daft, which is a silly thing to say. But the arguments that he was advancing for this were unionist arguments. And he seemed totally oblivious to this fact. It seemed oblivious to the fact that he was actually making unionist arguments against Scotland being regarded as a colony. It was actually quite odd reading. I shall put up a link to that article. It's worth reading. It nicely sums up where the SNP hierarchy is going so tragically wrong. And again, this is back to this failure to update their thinking since what I refer to as the beginning of the modern era of the independence movement, which some would date from 1999 and the restoration of our parliament, albeit in chains, the chains of devolution. Others, including myself, I would date it from 2007 and the first pro-independence Scottish government, and what I call the first actual democratic government of Scotland in the democratic era. That's a debatable point, but the point is that that is where they've got lost. That is where they've got stuck. They're back in that era, the pre-2014 era. Since 2014, there has been this new thinking in the independence movement, and the politicians have yet to catch up, and it's about bloody time they made the effort. So there is no doubt that Scotland is a colony, a non-self-governing territory. That is the point that Craig is making. There may be political reasons that come into this. There may be politics at play. So for all that is obvious that Scotland is a non-self-governing territory, it may be that there's politics going on which prevents the UN actually recognising Scotland's status as a non-self-governing territory, and I think we should be prepared for that. And we shouldn't be too disappointed, because, as I say, this exercise had to be done anyway. I confess, there was a time when I would have been almost as dismissive of it as Tommy Sheppard is, but I have learned Tommy hasn't. It is also the case that virtually every state that joined the British Empire officially did so, quotes, voluntarily, by treaty, including, for example, 37 states on the Indian subcontinent. People and elites were always co-opted. That's getting to the point that Tommy Sheppard was making about how and it's one that's often made said we can't have been a colony because we were actually part of the colonizing. But that's simply not true. As an empire grows, go back to the Roman Empire. As the Roman Empire grew and it absorbed territory, it created colonies. It took people from those colonies. You would expect the best of people. I'm not talking about slaves, although there was that as well, but I'm talking about the people that I seem to remember reading somewhere that Scotland have Negro blood, African blood going back generations, and it's because there were a lot of North African soldiers on the border between the Roman Empire and Scotland, and soldiers being what soldiers are, there were some goings on, shall we say. I don't know how true that, but it helps to make the point that being part of the colony, being drawn into that process, is part of being a colony. It doesn't disprove your colony status, it reinforces the claim to that status. Back to Craig's article. Getting Scotland's colonial status accepted by the UN is not easy and is not quick. That's another point that we have to remember. It's not quick, and we don't have all the time in the world. Back to Craig. The arguments may appear legal, but are profoundly political. But the UK's support of the genocide in Gaza, its slashing of development aid budgets, hardline rhetoric on immigration, and its irrational approach to Brexit have made the UK a deeply unpopular state at the UN. A little hint from Craig there that there may not be much sympathy for the British state at the UN, and that might work to the benefit of the Salvo Liberation Initiative. Very possibly, yes, that is part of the politics that come into play. There are other parts of that politics which may mitigate against as well. So we have to keep that in mind. Ultimately, Scotland needs friends at the United Nations. They need to know the move to independence could unfold very rapidly. We need friends, and through this activity, we are winning them fast. They have been there today, the team have been there today, and they've been meeting all manner of people from every country that you can think of, every country in the United Nations, and they've been making contacts. Now, even the SNP admits that generating these contacts, these relationships, is important. But here we have an organisation, Salvo Liberation, which actually represents the Scottish people, making these representations and building these relationships, not on behalf of the British state, no British state chaperone there, not on behalf of the British state, but on behalf of Scotland and Scotland's people. So it's a very different thing from, for instance, what John Swinney was doing when he met with Trump when he was just talking to Trump about whiskey. I'm sorry, I feel a bit ill every time I mention Trump's name. I don't think I'm alone in that. We need friends at the United Nations because we need friends in the world. And I don't see much difficulty with us gaining recognition so long as the process by which we restore our independence is impeccably democratic, which brings us back to the Scottish UDI plan, which, of course, if you're familiar with it, you know that it is impeccably democratic, and it calls for impeccably democratic procedures at every stage. And final paragraph from Craig's piece: over 20 good Scots are heading to the UN in Geneva today to continue the work. Anybody who does not wish them well is not a true friend to the cause of Scotland's freedom. Well said, Craig. But before we finish for the day, I want to take you back to the top of Craig's article here, when he says, eventually Scotland will need to seize its own independence at home. That is a crucial point. The UN will not restore our independence for us. The UN will merely recognise that we are a non-self-governing territory. Now, this does impose certain constraints on the British state. It does. But it does not make Scotland independent. The UN cannot do that. There has to be a process, an internal process here in Scotland. And we have to seize our independence, that we don't negotiate independence, which is what the likes of Alapa Party will tell you, that if you vote for them and they win the election, they will go and negotiate independence. Independence isn't negotiated. If the people of Scotland have voted for it, that's an end to the matter, because the people are sovereign. And if the people are sovereign, we have the last word. The doctrine of parliamentary sovereignty, on which the British state is based, insists that Westminster must always have the final word. And the political parties, the main political parties, accept this. They don't reject that idea, which is offensive. It's wrong. It's absolutely wrong. That idea must be rejected. Sovereignty cannot be shared. You can't say that we are sovereign except for. That is not then sovereignty. And likewise, it works the other way with the doctrine of parliamentary sovereignty. You can't say that Westminster is sovereign except for. Sovereignty is absolute. It's either with the people of Scotland or it's with Westminster. And that is what we've got to decide. We like to shout about how the people of Scotland are sovereign, but we're not acting sovereign until we seize our independence. And it will have to be seized. We will have to break away from the British state. And the final part of that sentence, when he says its own independence at home, that is the point that I'm making about there having to be an internal process, a process which can exploit what is happening at the UN. If Scotland is declared to be a non-self-governing territory, then that gives the cause of independence a boost. It gives it a platform from which to launch forward. But there has to be the vehicle. There has to be a vehicle, and there has to be a road for it to travel on, and that can only be local. And we get a lot of talk from certain quarters, and including Liberation, about that being a whole new setup. Graham McCormick and some 43 branches, they've put in an amendment to the leadership resolution, and it talks about setting up, I think, at least two extra parliamentary or pseudo parliamentary bodies to see through this process of independence. I say, why reinvent the wheel? We have a parliament there. I think most people in Scotland think of it as our parliament. And it gives you a very good basis for a campaign if you say this is our parliament, but it has been stolen. It has been taken from us. And what we have to do is take it back. We have to seize it. And we do that by breaking the rules. We have to break one of the rules I've mentioned before about how Norway, in a situation which I regard as being the closest parallel there is to Scotland, Scotland broke the rules of its union with Sweden by passing a bill in the Storting, the parliament, the Norwegian parliament, by passing a bill to set up its own consular service. So that it could have a say in international affairs, in foreign affairs, because just like with Scotland, according to the union with Sweden, Norway had to act through Sweden. And basically, Sweden spoke on the international stage for Norway, just as England speaks on the international stage for Scotland. And what is saying on the international stage is what none of us would ever say. I don't see a point in setting up all these additional groups and doing it outside the parliament. We can take that parliament back. And not, as I say, Norway broke that rule. The one that we break is the one that prevents us exercising our right of self-determination. That is a human right. It's an inalienable right, and you'll notice that the British state they're very careful not to deny that we have that right. They've already conceded it, such as the Edinburgh Agreement. They don't deny that we have that right, but they attempt to deny us access to it. And they don't even really do that. They just say, now is not the time. They make out that we have this access to what is a democratic route and what is a route to independence. In fact, we have none of those things. Because our government allows Westminster a veto, we don't have access to it. The route that the British state provides, a Section 30 type referendum, cannot lead to independence because Westminster retains the final say. It's not a proper constitutional referendum. In a proper constitutional referendum, the people of Scotland have a say, have the final say. Now, what I'm saying, what I'm telling you is that we have to have that process set up, that internal process set up, initiated at the 2026 election. That is the next opportunity that we have, and we should be seizing every opportunity. We should be seizing every opportunity as if it's the last one we'll ever get, and that is not happening at the moment. Nothing is being done to lay the groundwork for a process which could exploit the UN initiative that is being taken by Salvo Liberation. If Scotland was declared a non-self-governing territory tomorrow, that it would make no difference. Nothing would happen because there is not a process in place in the Parliament for that to happen. There is no process that can exploit that. We have to initiate that process in the 2026 election. If we do not, then it doesn't matter what happens at the UN. We will not have the process in place that can take advantage of it. So this could be another opportunity squandered. We have to take advantage of the opportunity offered by the 2026 election. As things stand, that is not being done. We are not looking like doing it. It's another opportunity that's going to be wasted. And on that rather depressing note, I will leave you until Sunday when Stephen Duncan will be back with us, and we'll be looking once again other aspects of the AMS voting system for the Scottish Parliament. Until then, bye.